Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm really delighted here to have with me uh, Jared Coseglia, who is the CEO of TRU Staffing Partners. They are a firm that helps people get jobs in the law, and in particular focuses a lot on privacy. And I'll have Jared tell you a little bit more about what he does and what his company does. The topic of today is how to break into the privacy law field. It is a wonderfully rewarding field to be in. It's a great club to be in. Once you're in the club, everything is wonderful. There are plentiful job opportunities and lots of great things, but getting into the club can be a little bit tricky. And so this is why I wanted to speak with Jared to find out some information about how people can better break into this area and get into the club to have fun with all the rest of us. So, Jared, first, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your company and what you do.
Well, Dan, thanks for having me. It's good to be in the club. Uh, I've been the founder and CEO of TRU Staffing Partners for 13 years. We'll celebrate our 14th year in business in 2024. And we specialize in three core verticals: e-discovery, data privacy, and cybersecurity staffing, with data privacy being a really key and big pillar of our business. We were very lucky to get into the space probably circa 2013, and have spent the last 10 years servicing the community. We staff everything from chief privacy officers all the way down to entry-level attorneys and everything in between, whether it's privacy program management, privacy engineering, privacy analysts of counsel. We work with law firms, we work with corporate legal departments, we work with non-legal corporate departments that house privacy. We work with government agencies, and we certainly work with software companies and third-party providers of consulting services for privacy. So if it's in the privacy ecosystem, we staff for it. And really happy to be here today. It is true that it is a bit easier to get jobs in privacy when you have somewhere between, we'd like to say, 3 and 8 years experience is where the biggest volume and bulk of job opportunities lie. And it can be challenging to get to that entry level point where you can gain the experience on the job without having it. And I'm here today to give everybody some guidance and hopefully a little bit of wisdom on how to be more competitive to find your way into the privacy club. And I will echo Dan's sentiments that it is a really rewarding community to be a part of. They are a very generous community, both in terms of knowledge sharing and just a general culture of kindness. Obviously, transparency and trust being cornerstones of good privacy programmatic development, but also being indicative of the kind of people and the style with which they lead. So proud to be here today and proud to lend whatever expertise I can to help others.
So I'd love to get a sense of what some of the entry-level opportunities would be. And so I guess the first thing I want to focus on is law students, people graduating from law school. And then I also want to talk to you a little later about, folks who are already practicing and kind of how they can migrate over to privacy. But first, for law students, um, uh, I think the obvious place to start is big law. The big law firms have privacy practices, but beyond big law, what are some other things that folks can consider for places to enter this profession?
Yeah, so big law is actually more challenging, I think, than most would expect for an entry level or right out of law school student to get immediate employment. It is very competitive, and most law firms are not looking for first and second year associates in privacy. They're looking for third, fourth, fifth, sixth year associates because the work is of a level of sophistication if they're coming to big law that sort of requires that. I think there's two ways to think of this. The first is kind of the what, and the second is sort of the how. And in a lot of ways, the how might be more vital information than actually what the job is. But let's talk about the what for a second. The what can range from a lot of different things, and the where as well. there are a lot of boutique law firms that specialize in privacy, security, governance. And sometimes you have to look for those firms that may tout more of a security governance function, but are rolling privacy into that nomenclature as part of their practice. But there's also a world of opportunity in consulting firms, particularly the Big Four and what I like to call the Big 12. And those logos can range anywhere from the Big Four, which is E&Y, KPMG, Deloitte, and PwC, but also organizations like FTI Consulting, Slalom, Control Risks, Charles Rivers Associate, just to name a few, BDO. All of these consulting firms do have consulting practices, and there is a very fuzzy line, particularly for entry-level attorneys, between what is the practice of law and what is consulting without giving necessarily legal counsel and advice. Sometimes those are the best ways for people to get really good hands-on exposure and experience in a professional setting when they're coming directly out of law school. And we do see a lot of attorneys who are coming out of graduating law school, starting in consulting firms, and then matriculating into big law once they hit that level of experience where they can command a second, third, fourth, fifth year associate package. We've also seen a lot of people move into software companies. It's a surprising space, but software companies are also looking for a level of legal due diligence and counsel around how their products integrate with programs. That can often be places where people with little to no experience can come in and learn those tools and help lend their expertise in the law to help evangelize the integration of those products. So it's not purely legal practicing roles that may be some of the places these individuals start. Obviously, there's also plenty of opportunity in corporate, either in the office of the general counsel, and sometimes they don't report to the office of the general counsel, but they may be lawyers working within a corporate ecosystem. Plenty of job opportunities there as well. What may be more compelling is sort of how to get into those jobs, because that is quite nuanced and may have less to do with your knowledge base and area of expertise from an educational standpoint, and more to do with your ability to network and the social spheres or extracurricular commitments or volunteerism that you've lent to the community in order to break into it.
So let's talk about that actually, the how. So what would be your advice for students in law school, like current students who are, either 2Ls, and maybe we can do 3Ls if the advice might be different. But what would you say to someone who said, hey, I really want to do privacy law. What should I do as a law student? What can I do now to do this after I graduate, to expand my job opportunities?
Well, there's a couple of things. The first of which is a lot of times credibility is visibility. I like to say 90% of credibility is visibility. And so it's really important that you be visible in the community. And that may mean in a social media setting. That may mean being visible to others, commenting on posts, posting research that you find interesting. You'd be amazed how many hiring managers are looking through their feeds when they're waiting in line or dropping their kids off at school or whatever the case may be. And so, people recognize faces, people recognize names, people recognize people that are commenting on the things that they post or have questions that they're looking for answers from experts in the field. And as I said, this community, as you well know, Dan, is a very generous one, and people want to answer the curious mind of somebody that wants to be in privacy. So you've got to make yourself visible. Just being out there is important, and it's harder to be visible these days post-pandemic. We often talk about the good old days prior to COVID, when people would get together and socialize it, drinks after work or coffee sessions, or have lots of in-person events. That doesn't happen as much as it used to in a post-pandemic environment, which has made it a little more challenging for people to really network in person. So it's a real important blend of finding those in-person opportunities, which may be conferences like yours, Dan. There are lots of other conferences. There are lots of local knowledge chapters for different professional affiliations. Go meet people, don't be shy, introduce yourself, If you're going to a conference and you're sitting in a panel, you should absolutely make it a point to introduce yourself to all of the speakers, either before or after the panel. You should stand up. You should ask questions. You should not be shy. That recognition will come in handy later. I mean, I've placed a number of people into positions over the years who I met, who came and saw me speak somewhere. And I was impressed, maybe at first, less with what they knew and more with their courage to stand out from the crowd. Being in privacy doesn't just mean having a corpus of expertise. It also means having an ability to influence others and win the trust and affection of those stakeholders who you need buy-in from in order to move the needle for the agenda of the privacy program. So some of those non-subject matter expert skill sets are important to leverage and can be leveraged long before you even graduate law school. So I would give this advice to anybody, whether you're a 3L, 2L, or postgraduate. But the other thing that I think is important is, especially in this economy, which is, let's call it a down economy compared to 21 and 22, which were very up economies, it's really important to consider contracting. And what do I mean when I say that? I mean, a lot of jobs out there, particularly for entry-level people, are not full-time direct hire or what we used to call permanent positions. These are contract opportunities. And if you've developed a particular niche, like let's just say you're really passionate about GDPR and you've done lots of research on GDPR and want to go into an organization where you might be able to help build a program that is moving into Europe or doesn't have really great GDPR compliance program establishment, then you might be able to come in a fractional capacity. It may be a 3-month contract that's full throttle, 40 plus hours a week. It could be a contract where they may need you 4 to 5 hours a week for a perpetual assignment to help an attorney who just has some overflow work that has some tactical need from an attorney to review. A lot of people need help with DPA overflow. A lot of people need help with ROPA. A lot of people need help with policy writing or rewriting and revising. And these are all areas where there are very specific tasks that somebody potentially coming out of law school that doesn't have, let's say, experience wearing lots of hats, but can be taught something that is a little rinse and repeat, can find their way in, but it may not necessarily demand or command a full-time, permanent, perpetual position. And what I find with a lot of law students are they just don't even think that way. Like, oh, like my way into the industry is not going to be getting a full-time job. I have to look for opportunities to have fractional impact in order to get exposure, in order to get experience, in order to get an actual work referral where a partner at a law firm can say, oh yeah, Jared came in and helped us with XYZ and was really instrumental. And if we had the demand and need to bring on an associate full-time, we probably would, but we don't. And I'd recommend him highly. That referral, again, going back to networking, may carry more weight than the expertise you have. It's a trusted community, and trusted referrals carry a lot of weight in helping people without experience get work. So thinking about your job search differently may be a key to finding your way in the door.
And so do you find that a lot of people who do this kind of contract work are able to transition pretty quickly after that to get something permanent?
Well, I can tell you that 27% of our contractors over the last 6 months have been asked and accepted conversion into full-time employment. So yeah, that number is very high, but it's also an economy right now where contractors are being hired at a 2 to 3 ratio. So for every 3 job orders we're getting in privacy right now, they're contract to hire positions. Not every time that somebody gets hired as a contractor is the carrot dangle that this will lead to a conversion into a full-time role. Sometimes you're getting that experience on one contract and then moving into another contract and then moving into a full-time role. Sometimes that employer really sees value in you and now can make the business case to invest further in your development, or has the responsibilities based on the conditions of the business to put more work on your plate and thus make a case to convert you into a full-time employee. But yeah, I mean, the short answer is we have people that are converting all the time. And when risk appetite from a hiring perspective is very low, you're going to see contract as a modality for hiring increase somewhat exponentially. And what's been amazing over the last few years is I don't think people really thought there was a talent pool available in the privacy community to really lean into contract staffing, but that is unequivocally the case now. And a lot of seasoned and tenured privacy professionals are finding that their happiness as a professional is more important than their stability. And sometimes happiness is found by moving around from impact opportunity to impact opportunity, as opposed to holding the line steady at one particular organization for an indeterminate amount of time.
So you mentioned the consulting firms as a possible entry point, and I do get questions from students sometimes about that, and some will say that does going to a consulting firm, especially in a position that doesn't have counsel or attorney in the title, what is the impact of that in the future on getting a position as a lawyer at a firm per se, or in a counsel role? Because some worry that if they do something that doesn't have counsel, that they kind of take themselves out of the running for future legal work or diminish their opportunities. Is that the case, or how does that work exactly?
It depends, right? So for example, let's say you're an attorney and you really want a privacy job, but you just don't find one, but you wind up getting a job as an IP attorney. Well, that IP attorney may be pulled into some merger and acquisition due diligence work that then has given them the opportunity to access some of that privacy or security knowledge and leverage that knowledge in the process of doing their IP due diligence work. That may be a really good way to go. But I've also talked to some attorneys who wind up going to become real estate tax attorneys, but their real passion is privacy, and going into real estate and tax is going to bear a far less likely transition into privacy, as we've seen, as say going into a consulting firm where all you're doing all day long is privacy. I'll also say this: privacy is still a very new profession, and other than many handfuls of large companies, a lot of companies are still running very lean in their privacy program. And even if their privacy program lies within the Office of the General Counsel, that doesn't necessarily mean that the work they're being tasked to do is limited exclusively to legal work. Meaning, somebody who went to a Big 4, Big 12 consulting firm spends a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years doing a variety of different privacy skills and responsibilities, which could range anywhere from giving counsel on geographic frameworks for regulatory compliance to helping institute third-party privacy program technology to handling an incident, potentially a very large breach incident, to doing data mapping exercises for PII and PHI, to being the go-to person that handles all the overflow work, to doing PIAs or DPIAs. I mean, all of this is sometimes done by attorneys, sometimes not done by attorneys. And so if you can pick up all that skill and experience and you're a lawyer, you're probably going to be more competitive when you reach the 3 to 8 year window, which is where most of the jobs in privacy are these days in terms of experience, 3 to 8 years experience, whether they're legal or not, than you would be going and practicing law in some area that really doesn't touch privacy in a meaningful way, and then trying to transition in with the argument that, well, I'm a lawyer first and I'm a privacy expert second. I think most hiring managers want a privacy expert first, and sometimes they require you to be a lawyer, but I don't think they're going to look down or frown upon a commitment to a broad exposure and experience right out of school at a consulting firm, getting your hands dirty and in the weeds of doing privacy, because all that becomes leverage, talking points that make you better at your job, right? So even if you don't do those things as an attorney in whatever the next incarnation of your work is, you're still going to be working with the people who do.
So I want to shift to another type of scenario, which is someone who doesn't get a position in privacy. They start off and they do some other area of law, like IP or something else, but they really want to do privacy. They really want to get into privacy. What would be your advice for someone in that stage? Let's say they have 2, 3 years of experience, but very minimal privacy experience. Can they migrate over, and how would they migrate over?
Yeah, so anyone can migrate over. I think it's possible for anybody to make that transition, particularly if they're passionate about the space, incredibly well read, they've done their research. Um, but look, I think that what's great about privacy and different about privacy from a lot of other legal positions, particular legal positions that sit within um, the Office of the General Counsel inside a major corporation, is privacy touches almost every part of the business. Whether you're dealing with product development and engineering, or you're dealing with human resources, or you're dealing with sales, whether you're a B2B or a B2C company, privacy is going to touch the business in just about every facet. So if you're working in legal, but you're not working in privacy, the best way to get into privacy is to make meaningful relationships with stakeholders throughout the business as much as you can, whether it's at the cafeteria or in the boardroom, because everyone is going to have some level of touch with privacy. And if you could be somebody that, even in a fractional capacity, this is how a lot of lawyers wind up moving into privacy or getting a taste for privacy, even ones that aren't directly out of school, is they wind up saying, somebody needs help with, looking at some of their agreements and some of their contracts with third-party vendors, and what it means in terms of how we're processing data. And we've got no bandwidth for this in the Office of the General Counsel. Like, is there anybody here that has some expertise? Volunteer, raise your hand, be visible, make yourself known, and become a fractional privacy resource within your organization, and step up to the plate and ask for those responsibilities. Look for those windows of responsibility. When was the last time your company's privacy policy got updated? What's the latest news in terms of state regulations being developed, and escalate that up to your stakeholders and make sure they're getting visibility and education on it if they're not already being provided that from someone within the business. So starting fractionally is a great way, and finding ways to touch all parts of the business will give you that influence and credibility and visibility that make it much easier to transition into privacy later, simply by making the case of, I have some privacy knowledge and experience, but maybe my greatest asset is everybody in IT loves me. And I can get them to help us with some of these tasks as it relates to moving the business forward from a privacy perspective.
How about outside the business? So suppose, there really is not much opportunity in a particular company or at a particular law firm. They just don't do much privacy. So you can't kind of nudge your way in because it just isn't that work. So you want to look somewhere else, and you have a resume that says, hey, you've done, all this stuff with just contracts generally, but never anything with privacy. What can people do to, kind of add some privacy into their resume? Does it help to say, hey, I took some courses in law school? Is a certification valuable? Are there other things that people can do to say, I don't have privacy experience, but I can take the experience I do have somewhere else and then apply it to privacy, and that would count for something?
So the short answer is yes. I think that while saying I took some privacy classes in college is helpful, I think the difference between that and certification is often demonstrative of self-investment beyond education, beyond a requirement that maybe you chose in college. And what certifications generally signal to hiring managers is this individual has made a financial and time commitment to investing in themselves. And if somebody is going to take a risk on hiring somebody right out of law school, or transitioning somebody who's got a legal job but has nothing to do with privacy, and their company really doesn't deal with privacy all that much, and put them in a privacy job, they're probably less concerned about your expertise and more concerned about your commitment. And so going and getting those certifications is a demonstrable way to show that commitment above and beyond going to law school. And the IAPP, who's got a salary survey out, which we were instrumental in co-sponsoring and developing some of the questionnaires. According to their survey, people that have multiple IAPP certifications are making 20% more than the counterparts that don't. There is clearly a financial value that hiring managers, and listen, a lot of hiring managers don't know privacy, so they lean into some of these certifications as a validation that the person has the skill sets necessary to step into the job. So yeah, I mean, I encourage people to get certified. There are lots of different certifications out there, and I wouldn't limit them to just the legal frameworks. I think there are some really valuable technological certifications out there. And having some of that technical expertise may be the difference between you getting the job and somebody else who's got all the other same certifications but doesn't really get the tech piece or hasn't invested in themselves in learning that tech knowledge, whether it's a proprietary piece of software or something a bit more broad. So yeah, I mean, certifications help. And we're seeing a pretty good amount of hiring managers ask more and more for certain acronymed certifications as a baseline for considering resumes for hire.
What are some of the areas of privacy law that are emerging or that we might not expect to have as many opportunities in privacy law that you see growing? So it's different areas of law, different topics, and other things that people should look at for privacy work.
Well, certainly litigation is huge. I mean, I think that one's pretty well established and accepted. But litigation is a huge one, right? I mean, e-discovery professionals 5-6 years ago really weren't focused on doing large PII, PHI breach review and notification. And now that's a huge component of that community and industry. So being in litigation, you're going to deal with privacy data, particularly if you're dealing with cross-border litigation, particularly if you're dealing with it in Europe. But, you know, M&A is a burgeoning space. You know, most companies that are on the seller side of an M&A often have no privacy program. Some of them have no real foundational security program either. And those are areas where we see a lot of demand for privacy expertise. We see a lot of desire for nuance in how to ask questions, set expectations with stakeholders on both the buyer and seller side as to how to approach scoping the risk and also the cost associated with integrating a company that may not have the same level of privacy posture or maturity that the buyer does. And so if you're interested in the M&A space, if you're an IP attorney who can also lend a hand in the privacy and security audit, those are very much burgeoning. And I would encourage people to look into those verticals because there's a shortage of talent, certainly in the M&A due diligence space for privacy.
So another quick question, just suppose someone's in a big law firm, but they're in a different practice group. And you know, they're busy, they're generally content with that group, but they kind of have an eye on privacy. That's where they want to go. What's your advice for, you know, navigating inside a law firm to kind of move to one where it does have some privacy work, but you're not in it?
Yeah, you got to find a white knight. I mean, that's the short answer is who's the practice group leader, who's their number two, who's that deputy, what keeps them up at night, where do they like to eat, where do they have lunch? Who are their customers that they're servicing? Being very well read on who they're servicing, what's happening in that world, what kind of industry verticals do they specialize in? Do they focus mainly on highly regulated sectors like banking and healthcare? Do they tend to lean more into big tech where they're dealing with product more than enterprise privacy? Understanding their business, understanding their clientele, and making it known that you want to be in their group. I mean, look, very few privacy partners and practice group leaders, at whether it's the AmLaw 200 or below and beyond, are well staffed. Most of them are turning away work. Most of them are looking for fractional resources with which to continue to take more work. And certainly all of them are interested in the kind of person who can manage customer client expectations as much as they can provide counsel to those customers. So yeah, I mean, you got to make yourself known. You got to know who those partners are and not be afraid to go and introduce yourself and be seen, because otherwise you're just one of many attorneys in this firm that do something else.
What are some of the things, you mentioned certifications, very valuable, networking. Are there other things that someone can add to their resume, whether, first in law school and then maybe beyond law school? Like, what other things could someone do beyond those things to strengthen their resume, add things that employers are going to be excited about when they see your resume?
Yeah, so I'll answer that in the way that you asked, which is really focused on the resume. But before I do that, I'll answer it in a little bit of a self-serving way, which is you need an agent. You may not need an agent like myself and my organization to help you get that first job. And look, I'll be very candid. A lot of organizations don't want to spend money on a service like mine to help them find entry-level people. But that's not why you're developing a relationship with an agency right out of college. You're developing a relationship with an agency right out of college because they know people, and they're probably going to be your best asset in getting you not only your second or third or fourth or fifth job, but getting you the best possible salary at the highest possible market rate for your skills and experience when it comes time to make that second, third, fourth job move. The bulk of jobs in this profession are between 3 and 8 years. And not only the bulk of jobs, but the maximization of an increase in compensation at the point of hire occurs in the 3 to 8 year window. So when we looked at the metrics between 2021 and 2022, which were the biggest boon years since 2018 GDPR rollout for privacy hiring, we saw that candidates between 3 and 8 years experience were getting 20 to 40% increases in base compensation through our agency at the point of hire. Now, this is in contrast to what the IAPP reported in their salary survey in those same years, 21 and 22, for people who got raises, which were only 7%. Now, that 7% is hefty, and nearly 80% of people got raises that were about 7% between 21 and 22, or in those 2 years, but don't expect people to get 7% raises. And the point of hire percentage of increase in salary over the last 12 months has also dipped. It's down to 12 to 24% for people with 3 to 8 years experience. So hiring managers are not paying whatever it takes the way that they were 2 years ago to get privacy people. But developing a relationship with an agent is going to arm you with all this information, arm you with having a set of eyes or a set of ears or multiple sets of eyes and ears looking out for what the next right opportunity for you might be. And it might be really nuanced. There are privacy people that are in the location tracking vertical that are very specific to, IP address or location data and how it's being used and monetized, and that becomes its own niche. And there aren't going to be the same volume of opportunities, particularly in that niche, as there will be in, say, banking or in, say, healthcare. And so having somebody looking out for your best interests, whose eye is on what your unique value proposition is to the community, becomes a tremendous asset in accelerating your earning potential and the vastness of the opportunities that you get exposure to. Now, having said that, let's talk about the resume. Most people who are right out of law school want to put their law school right at the top of their resume. I advise not to. Anyone who's got experience is putting their education at the bottom of their resume. Put your education down at the bottom. If you don't have any real experience practicing the law of privacy, you've got to talk about what exposure and experience you do have at the very top of your resume. Most hiring managers, for better or for worse, read the first 2/3 of the first page of your resume and glance at everything else. So, do they care what college you went to? Less so. Do they care about what you learned when you were in that school? Who was your professor? What classes you took? And why that's what you want to make for your career? Yes. Put that at the top. You need an executive summary, even if you're not an executive. not an objective. We see so many entry-level professionals who send us their resumes, and the first thing after their name and address is what their objective is. Well, look, the objective is to get whatever job you're applying for. So don't waste the time of your resume reader focusing on trying to explain to them what your objective is. The objective is you want the job. What you need to explain to them is who you are. And in that who you are summary, we'll call it an executive summary at the top, it should say a couple of things if you've got this experience. One, which is what is your area of expertise or your area of study and passion that you want to become your area of expertise? Who are the kind of stakeholders that you've reported to in the past? Look, if you had an internship that had nothing to do with privacy, but you were reporting directly to the CEO and assisting that CEO on getting organized for board meetings or getting organized for presentations, that has value, right? If you were working with lots of desperate stakeholders across an entire ecosystem within an organization and serving as the administrative linchpin for a summer internship, articulating that will have more value than whatever your GPA might have been from a law school, at least as we've seen for entry-level people getting hired for privacy. So strong summary of wants, desires, skill sets, and experiences at the top, and then chronologically what your experience is. For me, an entry-level resume really doesn't need to be more than a page. They're probably not going to read much of it after that anyway. And you want to focus the energy of the reader on those very first 6 or 7 bullet points on the resume to make sure they know what you really want to do. A resume is not just here's who I am. It's here's who I am and who I want to be. And a lot of people think a resume is just here are the bullets of things that I've done. And it really does require a little bit more prosaic approach to articulate the ambition as much as the reality of where your career is at.
Do you think doing internships while it's in law school is a good thing that students can do, and you recommend things like that? Going to events, blogging, the things like that or writing and publishing in this area. Are those some things that people can do to demonstrate the kind of commitment that you're looking for?
Yeah,
Look for?
choose what you publish carefully. I mean, I think what we've seen from a lot of students in the wake of what's happening in the Middle East right now is you choose your words carefully if you're going to self-publish and you're a student. Being controversial isn't necessarily, particularly with law firms, going to draw the kind of attention that you may be looking for. You need to keep it positive. You need to keep it academic. Nobody wants to read your op-ed. That op-ed may come back to create quite a disservice to your professional ambitions, more so than it will helping you get a job. You want to align yourself with people, not disalign yourself with people when you're a student coming out of law school. So just, we can all have mixed feelings on what's happening in the world right now, but when you publish those mixed feelings, it's forever, and it will follow you forever, as we've seen in the wake of a lot of what's happening in the world right now with law students writing about world events. So choose your words carefully, but that's not to discourage people. I think publishing is great. Be thoughtful in what you publish. Have lots of people you trust read what you publish before you publish it. Definitely go to events. I mean, whether it's just a cocktail event sponsored by a vendor or a software company, or it's a formal conference, or anything in between. Being an intern is great. I think in a lot of ways, who you're interning for carries more weight than what you're actually doing while you're interning. If you're going to intern, you got to know that whoever you're interning for is the most important reference that you're likely going to need in order to get employment in a position where you don't have that experience or have very little experience. So look for people who want to lift you up. Look for people who will be great mentors for you, even if they're not good privacy or they're just not what their skill set is, privacy mentors. There's still plenty out there to learn about business, about influence, about data, and all of those things can be weaved into a narrative that makes for a worthy investment of an entry-level person moving into a privacy position. Definitely.
So, wanted to talk to you a little bit about interview tips because that's another hat you wear, which is helping people to better prepare for how to interview well. And I'm curious what your, some high level tips that you might have to share with us, and your thoughts on, what can students do, what should students do to interview well when they, get an interview.
Yeah, it's a great question. And we do have a service that's specific to this at our organization to help both entry-level, mid-career executive and sales professionals better prepare for interviews. Often that preparation is the competitive edge and difference between you getting the job and somebody who's got the same or lack of same skill and experience getting the job. How you perform on an interview is going to be indicative of how an employer imagines or anticipates you're going to perform on a job or on an internship. And so being prepared for that interview is critical. And that means knowing how to answer some basic questions and knowing how to frame the way that you answer some basic questions. The first tip I'll give everybody is, listen, we haven't had a first round interview that was in person in 2.5 years. All first round interviews, 100% of them are virtual. So you have to know how to give good Zoom or give good Teams or give good Google Meet screenings. And part of that is being polished and presentable. You'd be amazed how many students have kind of adopted this, well, it's a Zoom culture and therefore I can show up and be as casual as I would be if I was, talking to my professor on a Zoom call. That's not going to fly. People want polish. Getting dressed up for the interview is important. It's a sign of respect. And there are plenty of people in hiring manager authorities that look for that sign of respect, and it can make or break a candidate. But it's not just how you physically present yourself. It's your articulation of thoughts and articulation of ideas. You need to have demonstrative examples of why you care about privacy so much, particularly if you don't have experience. I think passion is really important to people who are going to invest in interns or entry-level hires for their program or for their practice. Why is this so important to you? So the first tip is, it's good to keep it professional, but you've also got to make it personal. And I think a lot of people try to avoid showing their true selves sometimes. It can be very difficult to feel authentic when you're not in the room with somebody, although others find it much easier to be authentic when they're in the comfort of their home. But don't get too comfortable, right? It's still an interview. You still need to be polished and presentable. You still need to have your game face on, but also you've got to be approachable. You've got to be somebody that they feel all stakeholders in the business would want to know just as a person. Big tip for interviewing, you got to take things out of the hypothetical and move them into the actual, meaning interviewers are much more interested in historical than they are in theoretical. And often what we find, our entry-level professionals will wax, sometimes endlessly, about theory or about what they know, but aren't able to talk about what they've actually done. And so it's important for you to look for ways to talk about your experience, even if it's research experience, into things you've done, not things you know. And it's a slight adjustment in terms of approach, but it's a critical one because it allows the interviewer to go back and say, hey, this is what this person has actually done. This happened on, this time frame and with these people, and this was an actual event, as opposed to they're well read or they know this or they studied that. Talking about the historical is a key to good interviewing. And then the final thing is, it is definitely who you know. And it's not that I'm suggesting you should name drop on interviews, but if you've got mentors, if you've got people you've turned to for advice that have taken you under their wing, you want to express that. it gives people a greater sense of confidence knowing that they were taught by Professor Dan, as opposed to they were taught in law school, right? Making it specific. The devil is always in the details. And talking broadly about things, again, tends to move people out of the historical and into the hypothetical. And that's usually when interviews tend to derail.
So in light of that, there are going to be a lot of students that don't or aren't able to get an internship opportunity, and so most of what they'll have done is they'll taken some classes. They'll have, and that's actually hard because there are a lot of law schools that don't have classes. So
Yeah.
fortunately, my law school does. I teach classes, and we're expanding. We have a lot of opportunities. They might have written stuff. They might have done research, but they haven't, actually done practice. Is there a way to turn that into, or how do we use your tip when they really don't have that historical experience to draw from? Are there ways that they can talk about what they've learned in and turn it into something that resonates more?
This is when I give the advice to stop interviewing for jobs and start interviewing for companies. Meaning, how do you talk about the historical privacy posture of the company? A lot of companies have had a lot of privacy in the news as it relates to their business. And one of the ways to show real intelligence is to talk about the historical privacy implications of that particular organization. If you're looking to get into privacy and there are no jobs that are posted for privacy at the companies that you got your eye on, is there another job at Sephora or at Meta or at Google that you could apply for where you could say, hey, I understand you have these privacy issues or have had these complications, and that interests me too. And I'd be happy to raise my hand and volunteer and help participate in the initiative to increase privacy awareness, be a privacy evangelist, position yourself as a privacy evangelist. And the best way to not talk about your own history because you don't have any is to talk about the history of the people that you're interviewing with and be very well read on what that company's history is as it relates to privacy. As I said, a lot of people wind up taking jobs in corporate America or beyond that are not privacy jobs, but require a fractional privacy element to the job. Sometimes not even at first, but that's how it evolves because they raise their hand and volunteer accordingly. And I find that's the best way. It's like if you're on a date with somebody and you haven't looked at their social media, you probably should. It may feel creepy to talk about it on a date, but it won't feel creepy to talk about it on an interview. People will want to see that you've done your homework.
Do you have any other general advice for people, entering the field or in law school, seeking to do this, things that they can do to set themselves up, things they can either get on their resume or to do to prepare, to practice for this so that, when the time comes, they're ready and they're not, short something? Other ideas for, how people can get a competitive advantage.
Yeah, a lot of lawyers come out of law school and they say, I just want to be a lawyer. I just want to deal with legal. I just want to do the law. And the reality is there's such a blurry line between the law, operations, technical, programmatic work. Sometimes they expect privacy pros to be all in one, even if they have many people on their team. And so look for ways to learn privacy and get privacy exposure beyond the pure legal. And I find that a lot of attorneys who are somewhat disillusioned, particularly in a down economy, with the ability to attain a fully practicing privacy legal position would be well served picking up some of the administrative, technical, operational, programmatic privacy skills and experiences, because that will carry great weight. That will allow you to speak incredibly articulately about impacts you've been able to make on the business, even if they're not legal. Sometimes the best way to get a job in legal is to do a bunch of stuff that's not legal, so that when you do move into the legal, you've had experience with the stakeholders and the people that are affected by how the organization creates a privacy posture.
Well, this is great, and these are tremendously valuable tips.
I hope so.
Yeah, a lot of things that that I didn't think of, and I've been advising and helping advise students for almost a quarter century in this field. In days when there were no jobs and there was no profession, to now where there really is, and it's growing. A quick follow up on, you mentioned the 3 to 8 year window is this great golden window. Um, but there are a number of folks that may have maybe 1 year of experience or 2 years of experience, and I wonder how rigid the kind of that is, because I see a lot of times that they want 3 to 5 years of experience or more. um, is it possible to kind of sneak in with one or two, knowing that, hey, there's a bottleneck, and perhaps they're not going to get that many people with 3 to 8, so they might say after a while, maybe we'll take someone with two or one."
100%. And especially right now, Dan, because the challenge right now in the industry, so just to give you a sense of what happened in 21 and 22, 75% of the customers who came to us that we filled positions with in privacy gave us a salary range and then went above it in order to get the talent that they needed for that job. That's not the case over the last 12 months. There's been incredible downward pressure to keep costs in line. And so there are a lot of hiring managers out there looking for less expensive talent, even though they might be asking for more experience. At the end of the day, if they don't have 3 years, they've got 18 months, but they're $30,000 less than they were planning to spend. And we can take $15,000 of that $30,000 difference and invest it in some training for this person so that they can have an increased impact at the organization. That's absolutely something that is viable. By no means is that 3 to 8 year window the hard and fast rule. And by no means do most of my customers stand by a hard and fast rule of years of experience. Because look, you could go spend 2 years at an organization like Meta practicing law, and the amount of hours you're putting in and the kind of complexity of matters that you're dealing with or issues that you're dealing with might be more like 4 years of experience, right? Compressed into 18 months. So there is an appreciation for the relative nature of years of experience. I think what's important to remember as it relates to that 3 to 8 year window is that's how you exponentiate your earning potential. So if you're somebody with only 12 or 18 months of experience, don't expect to get that 40% increase in comp, because you've got a year of experience. You might be more likely to get those kind of big bumps in comp a little further on in just years of tenure than you would be, but you may be able to move into a better job or a job that plays to your strengths or gives you more growth opportunity with less than 3 years. Absolutely.
So I'll ask just one kind of final wrap up question, which is, do you have any other thoughts, tips, or things that we haven't covered? And also, I'll give you an opportunity to give a little bit of a plug for kind of the things that you do, so folks that are interested in talking to you more and learning more from you. How can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can visit our website, trustaffingpartners.com. That's TRU staffingpartners.com. We do have a service that's specifically geared towards entry level professionals, whether they're lawyers or not, breaking into privacy. We do interview prep, we do resume review and rewriting, and we do negotiation support as well, kind of all rolled into one service that gives you time with myself or someone on my staff. And we're actually going to offer a 50% discount between now and the end of the week for anyone that's listening to this and wants that service. You can go to our website, look under professional services, mid-career to entry career professionals, enter the keyword spooky. It is, after all, Halloween today. And we thought that would be fun and easy to remember. Enter the keyword spooky and you'll get a 50% discount on those services, which will give you 2 hours of dedicated time from someone on my staff to rewrite your resume, go through and prep for an interview. And this is, above and beyond what we might be able to do in terms of getting you an actual job. As I said, there are fewer and fewer clients that want to pay an organization like mine to help show them people that don't have experience yet. But that doesn't mean We can't help you get a job that you're applying for directly on your own. It also doesn't mean we can't help you, give you some career guidance on where to go looking to apply for those jobs and how to compete in order to win them, because there is an increasing volume of people trying to break into this industry more and more every single day. I mean, I was really impressed by the amount of students that have gone through your classes over the last few years, Dan, is remarkable and a beautiful thing. And I think we're going to see a lot more people wanting to make privacy the center of their career as opposed to a tangential piece of it. So whatever competitive advantage a entry-level job seeker can give themselves really carries a lot of weight. Not to mention, once you get to know me and my staff, we become evangelists for you. And we know a lot of people and can put in good words for people that we've had experience working with, even if we haven't been able to actually broker the introduction to their future employer right out of school. I would close by saying, my organization is a great resource, not only for the things we've discussed, but also just for market intelligence in terms of benchmarking how long it takes to fill a position, what the compensation bandwidths are in different geographic areas, what they are for different roles within privacy, what kind of trends we see happening in terms of what motivates people, how many jobs and where and in what industry verticals are remote versus fully in office versus somewhere in between in a hybrid. So if you're looking for statistical information to help you focus your efforts as a privacy professional looking for career development, we have a wealth of resources on our website that are completely free and accessible to everybody on all of the topics and a lot more. Including interview prep guides, including how to hire privacy professionals, including what a roadmap as a contract privacy pro might look like, the future of privacy jobs, how AI and engineering may or may not play into the future of those jobs, both from a legal and non-legal perspective. So please take advantage of whatever is your greatest curiosity, and we encourage people to reach out to us for any help they may need along the way.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. This has been really insightful and I think incredibly helpful. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been great, and happy Halloween, and thanks again.
Boo.